Good morning and welcome to the Delaware Engineering Government Series, Governing During the Time of COVID. This series was also made possible by Ulster Savings Bank, the law firm of Zarin and Steinmetz, and the Hudson Valley Credit Union. Since the pandemic began, we have been meeting weekly with a group of mayors and city managers. Today, we asked 3 of the mayors to join us to discuss how they have managed their cities during these unprecedented times. With us are Mayors Joe DeStefano from the city of Middletown, Mayor Steve Noble from the city of Kingston, and Mayor Rob Rollison from the city of Poughkeepsie. The camaraderie and willingness to share information and help each other is something that residents have mutually benefited from, but seldom have seen. Speaking on behalf of Pattern, Joe Chaika, and myself, the Hudson Valley has been better off from your leadership and caring during these challenging times. So with that, let me ask the 3 of you, how are you doing? We're almost into, well, depending on how you want to count, this is like the beginning of year 2. So let's start with you, Mayor Joe. How are you?
Morning. We're fine. My family's fine, and the city's doing well, and we're all hoping for some change coming in 2021. But we're all doing great. Thank you.
And Rob?
Well, I'm hanging in there, JD. It certainly has been a time that no one expected that we'd be going through. But as Mayor Joe said, my family is good, and that is obviously very important. And our workforce is doing well, which is also very comforting, which is so important. But it is sometimes, a day-by-day thing. But we're doing just okay and fine. I think that's the way to look at it.
And Steve?
I think, Jonathan, this has lasted a whole lot longer than any of us expected. And so I think that we're all doing okay, but I think we are all ready for this crisis to move on so that we can help to repair our communities and keep everybody moving forward. But I would have to say that the last year has been pretty stressful. And I think that we all try to handle that stress, to the best of our ability. And I think that that's why we're all in the positions we're in, is to try to move past the stressful situations and try to, dedicate our time and energy toward doing good things in our community. But I think there has been and continues to be some challenges ahead. But thankfully, I think as you've seen across the state and across the Hudson Valley in particular, we are doing okay.
I think for me, it was March 12th. That was the day that I packed up my bags in our office, which we no longer have. Pattern is completely virtual now, and said, that's it, I'm going home. And it's almost March 12th again. And it's almost inconceivable to me that a year has gone by where we've been living under the most, bizarre circumstances. This hasn't occurred for 100 years. So it has been, and I think the only way that I can put it together is that every day is a full day, and then somehow there were 365 of them, and a year went by. So, and I know, having spoken to you guys every single week, that the challenges of this year have been extraordinary. So why don't we jump into that? Joe Chaika?
Thanks, Jonathan. Good morning, mayors. Thanks for being with us today, and thanks for being with us, every day, once a week. It's been an amazing journey, if you will, over the last 12 months. So I want to jump into the questions and frame it just a little bit. Between COVID, the economic disruption itself, social issues, and all of these executive orders that have been really helping but also restricting your ability to govern, It's clearly not what you expected since last March. There are many new and unexpected pressures brought to bear during this period, and the job of mayor, as difficult as it always has been, got even more difficult. So we've got a couple of questions, and I'd like to start with Mayor DeStefano. When did you actually know that COVID was going to be the problem it is? Mayor?
Sure. Well, I had no idea that it's going to be what it is today, the past year. But back in February, we started planning. We brought together our emergency management team, and based on what was happening, on the national level, and the back and forth, and we knew something was going on, but we didn't know what. So at the time, our emergency management team consists of our police chief, our fire chief, and some of our other department heads in City Hall, Maria Bruni, our economic development people. And we started meeting on a daily basis. And then each person was then assigned certain responsibilities. Like the police chief was meeting with the homeless shelter, Maria would contact the soup kitchen and to see what their plans are in this preliminary stage as we were facing something that was unknown. And we knew it was bad, but we didn't know how bad. So we started probably mid-February. I think my first notes go back to actually February 14th, Valentine's Day of 2020. And so it was pretty early on in the process, but we did recognize something bad was happening early.
Mayor Noble, same question.
I think when we had to cancel our St. Patrick's Day parade, and be able to tell the community that this virus was something that, based on everything that we had learned over the first few months of 2020, that this we couldn't gather, was, I think, when it sunk in with me that the entire landscape of the community that we have worked in and lived in was going to change. And of course, none of us knew how and what the extent of the impacts would be. I knew that at that moment, we needed to be prepared to be able to assist people in a way that a municipality generally hadn't done. We often relied on our nonprofits to be able to kind of pull us all together. And this was we knew that at that point, we were going to have to step up, as a city and as a community. And but I knew at that time that we had our work cut out for us, because we, like the state of New York, hadn't dealt with a pandemic in 100 years, and so we were the first line of defense. We were the first to issue executive orders. Our cities were the first to close our parks. We were the first to curtail public events. And we issued a slew of executive emergency orders prior to the state getting prepared to do that. And I think that is why local government is so amazing, is that we were there on the front lines, ready to act when this came at us.
Right. And Mayor Rollison?
Yeah, much like my colleagues and friends, Joe and Steve, very similar here, looking at the landscape that was coming towards us. And for me, having the meetings of our department heads and making sure that we at least, were on the same page, so to speak, as not really knowing what was going to happen and how we were going to react. But the one thing that was really important was that we were going to do everything that we could do to project the fact that the city would continue to run, services would be provided even in the unknown that was coming towards us. And then when it really sort of got real was when I made the decision the morning of my State of the City address, which I think was March 11th. And at that point, there wasn't any restriction on gatherings. But however, everything that we were seeing was like, well, this is coming, right? And to put, I think there were 206 people that RSVP'd, to put them in one place would have been the wrong thing to do, even though we didn't really know, but we knew that would have sent the wrong message. And I remember having a conversation that morning with a very close friend of mine, another elected official, who said to me, I heard you might cancel. He says, if you cancel, then everything's going to start to cancel. And literally, I canceled. And then it literally started to happen, right? There, the big venues were shutting down, and it was just, everybody was, operating out of abundance of caution. And then what we did, initially, as I said just a little bit earlier, we prioritized the city services that people needed. And that was sanitation, fire, and PD and EMS services. And that's how, in the beginning days and throughout this, and it's still really the same, those are the services that are most critical to public safety and quality of life. And we concentrated on, again, protecting the workforce, making sure that we had all of the protective gear. And luckily, all our departments had enough on hand initially. But then, that also became challenging as everybody was struggling to get things. So it really was evolving. But I'm really proud of the way our city government, and I'm proud of the way that Kingston and Middletown did it too, right? They got together. They started to have conversations, because the last thing you want is the citizens, who are obviously were in the state of the unknown, just like we were. But at least their governments at the local level, as Steve said, were going to, project that they would help the communities get through it.
I think a lot of the that initial shock and fear has changed to, let's say, other mental reactions in terms of anxiety, depression, and other things as this has gone on for a year. And that initial shock of March, April, May, February, we started reading things about China and Europe. But I think that initial shock, it's hard for people to put themselves back into that moment unless something very specific occurred. Now they're sort of enduring it. But quickly after the initial shock came the executive orders of the governor, in which case your local economies were then told to roll back and start to shut down. How has that impacted each of your cities? And so let's reverse this. Rob, let's start with you in terms of the restrictions. What happened and where are you today?
Well, as we all did, we were, reacting almost on a daily basis. And obviously, one of the things, and I need to say this, and we talk about it all the time, is, we started those weekly phone calls, which really helped, because we were talking amongst all of us of what, we were seeing, how we were all reacting and trying to do a lot of these things collectively, right? So all the cities were sort of trying to do the same thing and, get their way through it. But we were obviously started to worry about the impact on the budget. We enacted, hiring freeze and budget cuts of, close to $2 million, because we knew the revenue was going to start to dry up. And then also just trying to be as supportive as we could in explaining what we were getting, as Jonathan, on your daily calls in that control room, information coming fast, not always really with a lot of detail. And, the local government, again, like Steve said, was like where it really happens. So having the ability to communicate, and we learned a lot, because also we knew that we weren't exactly prepared for some of these things on a communication basis, right? We don't have a robust, economic development department. We've got one person, and, businesses calling up for guidance. And the other thing, and I'll turn it over to the rest of the gang, is that what really helped, and it still to this day helps, is our coordination with the county and the infrastructure that they were able to bring to get information out, and also to get clarification, so folks would understand what they could do and what they couldn't do. And being sort of caught in the middle sometimes, it was difficult. You didn't always have the right answer, or sometimes you didn't have any answer.
Well, and I think that's what Pattern recognizes, that the vertical communication within your own county was there. That structure was pretty quickly set up for the county executives to have daily calls with the municipalities. And I think what Pattern tried to do, and honestly, Rob, I think you were the first one to say, could we move these calls that we had been doing to weekly? And we thought the communication across county lines could be done. So Steve, when the executive orders started to come in, and the impact on the local economy, how did you deal with it?
I think we got really good at interpreting. these executive orders, are they're not the clearest for even us to understand, let alone our businesses. And so I think we played, and in particular, I know I personally played a part in helping to take what was being told to us as mandatory and then explaining that to our business community as to what they can and couldn't do, and then helping to seek clarification when issues arose. Because again, as we know, there were many iterations of the executive orders because they didn't always get it right the first time, and it got refined and they got better and they got. But we needed to communicate, so we created websites for our local businesses to be able to check, to be able to better understand, what the world was telling them they had to do. I started daily briefings, on Facebook and on our local radio station, so that our businesses understood, what our regulations were. And one of the things that we all talked about doing, and what worked out really well for us, one of the biggest businesses that we have is the hospitality industry. And some parts of the hospitality industry were able to kind of eke their way through because our cities opened up our streets to outdoor dining and outdoor retail, and that really helped. But I think one of the biggest impacts that we saw were on the large venues. So everything from the Bardavon that shares both Poughkeepsie and Kingston, and some of our larger catering halls and wedding venues, they've all been crushed, by this virus. And it's been, I think, one of the hardest parts for me as a mayor to be able to just see these businesses shut down and these cultural institutions not be able to be open since last March, when as public officials, we go to these types of events in places all the time. And that has been, I think, a huge, that's been one impact that they haven't been able to even eke through. And that's been tough to watch.
And it's not just the economic impact of having them shut down. It's, in your case, it's, hey, let's have a night. We'll go to UPAC. And it's good for the, people looked forward to it. It was part of their social activity. Mayor Joe?
Oh, we had to get involved in programs that we were never involved in, like home food delivery for our seniors. Well contacts, where our senior program started doing things. We have a list of 3,000 seniors where they were making weekly calls to our seniors to make sure if their needs were being met, if they need anything. Our normal programs like Rec and Seniors now became different enterprises. They became outreach programs, and we had to create an essential employee program for their kids, so that we have about 15 kids from different districts in our recreation program so that their parents can go to work, and mostly police and fire and also some city hall workers. So we redefined what the employees' job titles were, but financially we're going to be okay. There was one advantage to the COVID crisis is government on different levels started looking at different ways of doing business. For example, we've been fighting with the Office of Court Administration about a second court mandated in Middletown and court facility. And they've been using the Common Council chambers. They wanted us to build an $8 million court. We've said for 5 years, no, we're not going to do that. And now with virtual courts becoming more of a reality, they've agreed to a downsized court. It's going to be under $3 million, and we've reached an agreement with them in principle to do that. So government's going to be redefined both on the state level and on the local level. And our people had to adjust to all that. Financially, we're going to be okay. We had no knee-jerk reaction. We didn't do any layoffs. We're in pretty good shape financially. We met the tax cap 9 years in a row. We had some money in the bank, about $11 million surplus. And we have a business model within our infrastructure, within our city government, of wholesaling water and sewer services and septic services, where we're bringing in, a couple $1 million a year to help finance our capital program. And our capital program never stopped throughout the pandemic. So we kept moving with our water and sewer improvements, our park improvements. We took the opportunity with the Paramount being closed to do some major improvements there. So we're we didn't want to make any cuts in police services, for example, because those short-term money cuts would have long-term impacts on our city. So we didn't want to do anything that was going to change the way we do business, in hopes that the federal government would come through with aid at some point. It looks like they will. We budgeted that way this year. We didn't budget any big cuts, and we're still impacted more in a negative way by the state mandates and some of the necessary issues that people seem not to be talking about anymore, like workman's comp reform, that really impact us, versus how much we're going to get in one-shot COVID aid over the next year. So I think locally we need to put the focus back on how we're going to survive in local government, both short-term and long-term. A lot of that focus right now is how much aid we're going to get. We're going to welcome it. We're going to get it. Schumer, Gillibrand, Maloney are going to deliver. But we need to still go back to those old issues of what makes us so costly doing government here in New York State, that is chasing people out of New York State. And those are things that are the cost. One of them is the cost of local government and property taxes. So I don't want to lose the big picture while focusing on the short-term stuff, which is, and short-term being COVID. I think it's over soon. So let's look at the other big issues also.
Well, and I think that, the progress that had been made for all of your cities over the last 10 years, there's tremendous momentum. And we'll get to that issue a little later. Joe, before we go to the next question, I do want to, where we can, integrate questions that are being posed. And so this one's for Mayor Rollison. And it's that you and Superintendent Rosser formed a children's cabinet in February 2020. How did this affect the community's response to needs of our kids in Poughkeepsie?
Well, I'm glad that question got asked, because I'm really proud of the cabinet and the work that it's done. And when we originally thought about doing it as a partnership between the school district and city government, we didn't know about COVID. And the cabinet structure was in place. So we had the ability to have conversations as it related to the needs of our children and families. And one of the things early on when, we realized that school as we know it was going to change dramatically, and students going out of the classroom and going virtual, one of the first things that was the challenge, and this has been a challenge for many, many school districts, but especially ones that hadn't really gotten into virtual learning per se, right? And the need for Chromebooks and the response of the community with Wi-Fi initiatives, so students could actually access, once they got the Chromebooks and were able to, get online, was a learning experience. But the cabinet, was supportive, and I'm very proud of that. But also just the school district responded, in a very diligent way, and something that they were not necessarily completely prepared for anymore than city government was. But, working together, it really made a difference. And the cabinet is, now we're into having the working groups are now committee chairs, and people are volunteering to be in these groups that'll work on specific issues as it relates to the education of children and support to families in the city. So it couldn't have come at a better time, JD.
Yeah, no, I no question about it. Joe, over to you.
Sure. So, Mayor, shortly after the pandemic began last spring, so did social protests. As a result of the tragic death of George Floyd, there's a lot of polarization. There's a lot of riots, some good, some bad, in terms of violence, and so a lot of tragedies. How did you govern during the social protests that were possibly impacting your city? And let's start with Mayor Noble.
Kingston has always been an active community when it comes to social justice issues, and it's something that we as a community, recognized this past spring and summer when all of these, terrible incidents happened with police brutality across the country. We had thousands of people come out, not only on just kind of the one-day events, but really on a weekly basis. And I have to say that our community responded exactly as I hoped they would, which was with grace. Even though people were upset and people were angry, but they demonstrated, with respect for one another, and they did so in a way that was also informational. People have taken their concerns and they've turned them into, good work. And I think that the governor's, whether the governor issued his executive order related to police reform or not, our community was still coming together to talk about ways to continue to make sure that we have, an accountable and forward-thinking police department, and that our criminal justice system in general, is equitable, like it was designed to be. And so I think we really turned what were, atrocities in other communities into, positive learning experiences for our community without any violence, and without any property destruction. And, I think that is because we've got some really amazing people here in the Hudson Valley and in Kingston that really they knew that they in order to get progress done, it needed to be done in a meaningful and friendly way.
Mhm. Thanks, Mayor. Mayor DeStefano down in Middletown.
Yeah, there was a lot of justified anger. And of course, we didn't know how people were going to react, how they're going to channel that anger as it developed. People are watching television and they're seeing both peaceful demonstrations and some violent demonstrations. So, so we had to prepare. We had to prepare for both. And even a peaceful demonstration requires a lot of police services for the safety of those marching. So it took a lot of effort, and while tense, it was pretty costly in dollars and cents from a budgetary part. But this actually opened up a dialogue with the police department and the city officials and community members who normally were not involved in city affairs. We took this as an opportunity to support the cause. We have pictures of our police department, of many members posing with some of the protesters and supporting them on the George Floyd, what happened in Minnesota. So we took it as an opportunity to support, to listen, and to learn. We took it as an opportunity to build relationships with community members who were not normally involved, as I said. And we did make changes in police operations per the governor's executive order. And I agree with Steve. Some of these things may have happened without the governor's executive order, but that order certainly moved it up. For example, we've been talking about body cameras here for 15 years. It's costly, but we immediately did it. By the end of the year, we had body cameras on every one of our police personnel. And that's a cost of $1.5 million over 10 years. So the people in the community were happy to fund it, and the police were happy to get it based on what they saw happening in other communities. So we're partnering now with the school district on a program called My Brother's Keeper. So it opened up dialogues, it opened up new avenues for people to voice their concerns. And I think it's going to be something that's not going to require some major issue to revisit. I think the document will be fluid, it'll flow, and the dialogue will continue. And we're looking forward to, if there are concerns in the community, them coming forward. But for the most part, I think we had one arrest over the number of several protests, and that was someone who refused to move out of the road and was holding up traffic. One person out of 500 holding up traffic. But for the most part, they were peaceful. They got their message out there, and we were happy to participate with them.
Sure.
I remember from our discussions during that, during the summer, that if COVID and the economic disruption weren't enough, the combination of, remember, that's the run up to the presidential election, polarization exists here in the Hudson Valley, as well as the social protests. And the three of you had to manage your communities wanting to express themselves in addition to everything else. And I think, people could just make light of it, but I remember the planning that you each discussed with collectively. How do we do it safely? How do we account for people that want to march in the streets? It was quite a remarkable period, and honestly, I think the three of you and on all the other mayors and city managers that were part of this did an incredible job, but it's not something the public would ever really notice. They just sort of expect you to do it. I wanted to move to the next question, an integrated question, I think, that came from our audience here, which is, it's the winter and it's cold and we're just trying to get through this. And yes, the vaccine is on the way, and we'll talk about that a little later. But is there anything among the executive orders, or is there anything that has, as a result of needed responses on your part, other than police, that you hope will change going forward? That, hey, we were innovative and this is actually a good idea, so let's keep doing it. Anything come to mind? I don't know where. Joe, let's start with you.
I already brought up the courts.
Yes.
Yes. There's going to be a $5 million savings to the city on the capital cost, but also there's going to be an operating cost savings to the Office of Court Administration with more virtual arraignments, with bail reform. People aren't coming into courts, facility requirements. And on a local level, we're looking at going to more kiosk usage for payment of bills and taxes. People like coming into City Hall still, but there's no reason why we can't have a kiosk set up where they can do their payments. We just went, believe it or not, to online payment of property taxes, use of ACH. So yeah, there's going to be some innovative things that we were forced to do. If we wanted to collect our money, we had to make some changes. So government, I think, can get smaller, even on a local level, as a result of this. So I think that's the positive thing, and we will see that moving forward. And you'll see more cooperation between communities, because Middletown and Waukegan, for example, we did a lot together, a lot more than we usually do during the crisis. So and you'll see, and we've talked about it on our weekly meetings, about the need for intermunicipal agreements for shared services. And there's more of a dialogue in that area also. And that all results in savings and better local government management.
And I think, we'd all feel good if we could check a box somewhere and say, it was a pretty rough period, but the following innovations or new ways of doing business or cooperation are also part of what we talk about coming out of this. Steve? Anything?
I would agree that, virtual meetings is, that has worked out really well for us. Not only we've had more people watching and being able to tune into our, virtual kind of common council and planning board and those types of meetings, but we've also had a lot more people. We've got a lot of projects. We've been really trying to get a lot more public input. And so we've been able to get a whole lot more people. Just like, you've got over 100 plus, folks watching right now. If this was an in-person conference, how many people could really get to an event venue to watch the three of us? And so I think that has changed for the better. I still think that, we'll need a mix in the future, but so that's one thing. I think the other thing internally is that we never had a work from home policy. And so up until the pandemic, we never let a city employee work from home. And now, that is what we do. A lot of people have worked from home and continue to work from home. And I think going forward, there may be folks who should work from home, for whatever reason. And there could be future cost savings to local government if we do and are able to bring on new employees without having to, say, build new space for them to work from.
And Rob?
Well, I wanted to follow up one quickly on that Steve said. I think, Steve, after this virtual discussion today, that if for some reason, Pattern wants to have us in person at an a venue, people will come to see us. I mean, I think they will now know how cool we are and fun we are as the three mayors, that they'll want to come and follow up. But to what both of you said too, was that, we really had to do the same thing, right? We looked at, closing City Hall off and on due to COVID spikes within the building. We saw that we really weren't all that friendly when it came to making payments online. We're working on the ACH. Currently now there's a service charge to pay by credit card, and these things they need to go away. We need to create the ability for folks to pay as they want. They don't necessarily have to come into City Hall. I do know that people do like to come into City Hall, just like I do. However, a lot of things have changed in the virtual world. I do want to just touch on two quick things. One of the things that work, because we went into COVID and then got into warmer months versus now it's going, it's obviously the other way, where we did help facilitate within, especially the downtown and other areas as well, outdoor dining spaces. And we put a lot of resources into that because we just didn't really know, what restaurants were going to want to do. We got hay bales and barriers, and we were buying stuff to make sure that the businesses could get them when they needed them. And then the other thing too that is really super important, and it's been a priority for me and others, but fiscally it's been challenging, with our situation here in the city. And I heard Joe D mention an $11 million fund balance, and I know we have a lot of fun with that when we talk about a fund balance, because we don't have a fund balance in the city of Poughkeepsie, even though our deficit is dropping. Is the emphasis on parks, the emphasis on the waterfront, where people, when we started to warm up at the end of March and early April, the amount of people that were trying just to get outside and to walk around and to exercise, that's not going to change. And we're already seeing it now in the cold weather, where I see more people out now than I did, say, last year at this time. And I think that we want to, to invest in our park system, which is important. We have two pools that we had a meeting yesterday on, getting ready to get them ready to be opened up, and making sure that, we're ready to adapt to whatever the rules and or regs are going to be from the state or the county health department on that. And I think, the other thing which has been very helpful, and I'll end with this, is that, really listening to our employees with their ideas, because they're out there doing this stuff every day. I mean, I'm here and I think I'm active and I think I'm involved, but I'm not in the FD, I'm not in the PD, I'm not in fire, I'm not in DPW or parks or downstairs in finance. Listening to our employees, how we can better deliver services, and also at the same time trying to save money and to bring that deficit down. So in 3 years, when I leave office, we'll leave it in a better place than in which we found it.
Well, so a couple of things. So let's see, we came up with a more efficient way to handle courts, online payments, public participation, outdoor dining, increased outdoor recreation. I mean, that's a pretty good starting point to say these are a list of things that could get better after, we have the virus in our rearview mirror. The other thing I want to say, and this is part of our kidding around with each other, which is that, every time that you, Rob, will say you're jealous of Mayor DeStefano's surplus, but I think it's where you came from that should be part of the story, which is what you inherited in terms of a deficit to where you are today. And the city of Poughkeepsie is in a much better place than it had been financially. So many of the things that you have tried to do, you never could have been able to do. Now you can still be jealous of Joe's, fund balance. But
well, also too, JD, they both are DRI winners. We didn't bring that out either.
Yeah.
He tried to grab some of that fund balance also at one of the meetings, if I recall.
All right, Joe Chaika.
Sure. So, you guys were talking about an increase in confidence really with the staff, with the city staff. You're hearing ideas from them, and those ideas are floating up to the top, if you will, and you're really putting those things together and making them work. And we've been working with you throughout this entire period, understanding what's going on, and you guys are sharing ideas, you're sharing emails in and out of the meeting. Great stuff. And as we've been saying, the public doesn't always recognize this because they're not part of that. How do you think that the public's trust is now in the city? I know it's a tough question to answer. And if it is not highly recognized as a high amount of trust, how could you restore it?
And Joe, the only thing I would add to that question is, yes, if you can, the insight for the city, but it is a broader question about restoring the trust in government.
Government itself, yeah.
So,
Mayor Noble, we'll start up with you.
Yeah, I think that during this pandemic, we saw, government is a big word. And as we all talk about, there's a very big difference between local government, state government, and federal government. And so you can have a variety of trust in different levels of government. I do think that from a local government perspective, we have served our community to the best of our ability during this crisis. I think that we've all stepped up to do everything that we can to keep people safe, to keep our cities going. And as Rob and Joe mentioned earlier, we have committed ourselves to making sure that there was almost no change in services, those essential services that our residents depend on. But when you get to the state and federal government, it gets a little bit harder. And we sometimes get lumped into decisions that are made well above our pay grade and outside of our scope, which can then impact what people think about local government. And I think that even today, after doing all of the work through the pandemic, sometimes it really does come down to issue-based concerns. And, we have, again, continued to deliver on all of the essential services that are important to our residents. But there may be decisions that are happening in our community, whether it's maybe we're, because of the pandemic, we are seeing an increase in housing pressure in all of our communities. And that is then causing, what are you doing about housing? And you're not doing stuff fast enough to be able to stem the pandemic wave of housing price increases. And so no matter what we do, we all know that there's always more to do. And for some, what we're doing is not enough or not the right thing. And I think that is what keeps us all up at night, and what, we all try to not get stressed about as much as we, probably do get stressed, because we know that we can't always solve all issues at the same time. And sometimes when we do have issues that we're trying to solve, like our communities all stepped up to create a much more welcoming environment for outdoor dining and retail and parks during the pandemic. And so what that meant was that people from New York City have moved up here because they saw that all three of our cities did such an amazing job of opening up and doing it safely. And that then has helped to create some of the other issues that we're now trying to work on. So that's a tough question, but I do think that we are the most trustworthy, I think, at the local government level. And but we still have work to do to be able to kind of go get through some of the hurdles that we have in front of us.
Sure. Mayor DeStefano, same question. Public trust in government.
Well, I think there has been an erosion in public trust in government, but it has nothing to do with the pandemic. I think it started in 2015, 2016 on the national level with President Trump, and then candidate Trump. And I see a different reaction locally. I see the way Steve sees it locally. And, from our city briefings with the county executive and the governor, I believe overall people have confidence in both local and state government. I think despite the recent events on the state level, that people have confidence in Governor Cuomo's ability to manage this crisis. And I think that's reflected in the polling, and I think it's reflected in reality. And I see a change now, even in on the federal level, now that they've decided to get involved in the vaccine issue and have taken a leadership role. On a local level, Steve Newhouse has done a good job. The communication and I believe we in Middletown have done a good job with the resources that we have. We don't have access to all the data, and it does get frustrating sometimes when people call and say, why is Middletown a microcluster from November through the holidays? And I can't explain it. And I've conveyed that to Albany, that sometimes the communication issue, our ability to explain things to our people is equally as important as their ability to implement a program. That if they implement something that we can't explain on a local level, then I don't think people buy into it, because I believe there is more trust on the local level when we say something that we have to close the park versus when the governor says we have to close the park, or the president says that. So, so many things are out of our control, but we've become the advocates now. We've become advocates for businesses. We've become advocates for the public, for our residents, whether it's advocating for vaccine, which we have no control over. We have to become the advocate. We're signing people up. We're helping people who have limited access to the internet to sign up for the vaccine. It's very complicated. We're providing transportation to people who need to get shots. We're advocating for the location of testing, and we got involved in the food deliveries, our bus services, our checking on the elderly. So I get the feeling that people know that we on a local level are fighting for their families, because our families are in the same situation. We're shopping at the same supermarkets, and we're fighting through this just like them. It's not that we're anything any different. We're in the same situation. They believe when we implemented a local mask mandate, people bought into it because they saw us walking down the street with our masks on. They saw us doing things. So I think people were more relatable to us on a local level because we're living through it with them, and our behavior did matter, and will continue to matter throughout this pandemic. But I think there is a lot more trust in local government than there is on the other levels. But even on the county, from Newhouse to Cuomo, I think a job well done so far.
Sure. And Mayor Allison, are you seeing this similar things in Poughkeepsie?
Yeah, we are, and I echo what both Steve and Joe just said. The cooperation between the different levels of government, state government, obviously, with lots of the calls we were having weekly and every other day calls with Governor Cuomo's Office of Local Government, and we were on. It seemed in the beginning of the pandemic, and for quite some time, we spent more time on the phone than I did in my entire life, really, with the calls between the state, the county, and then Pattern and County Executive Molinaro, with what he's been able to do, because the county is just a larger infrastructure, right? And they have the ability and the responsibility legally to do things that we don't do, we can't do, and we don't want to do. But we want to also, at the same time, I'll give you just a prime example. Like right now, we've got potholes all over the city of Poughkeepsie like I've never seen before. This weather has been brutal on our streets. This morning coming in, like 5 minutes after 8, here's one of our pothole crews, right? And it just, I felt good because I had been on that street where that pothole was yesterday. Now they're filling it. Now how long it lasts, we don't know, because, the asphalt plants aren't open yet. But I mean, people see that. And in this crazy world of not being normal and anxiety and the discourse that, is hopefully ending in Washington, but it still seems to be going on, that at least here in the local communities, you see the Department of Public Works, your garbage is getting picked up. We're making every effort to fill a pothole. Police officers are responding. The fire department is out there doing its job. And at least you know that city government, with the 352 employees I think that we have, are out there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, working for you, the resident. And at least that gives you some sense of comfort. And especially for, individuals who are still homebound. People aren't going out like we're going out because we have to. So, seeing that equipment going by your house or your apartment, feeling good about that. And I wanted to, just end with this. And we've talked about this, incessantly with, and Joe brought it up with, the change in government in Washington, where where now at least local governments and state governments aren't caught in the middle of some political nonsense. When it was like, when you talked about aid to local government, it was like, oh no, listen, this is where it's going on, because Washington, D.C. isn't picking your garbage up, and they're not driving the fire trucks, and they're not responding in police cars, and they're not filling potholes. And this is where it's happening. And the local governments are where it is at. And that's why, the federal government needs to step up, and hopefully they are, because we all have serious budget challenges that really only those types of dollars, flowing from the federal government can help us.
And each of your perceptions with something that you don't have control over, the vaccine, how do you feel that's playing out at the very local level? Is there, there are multiple news stories every night about it, but let's start with you, Rob. So do you think, I'm trying to think how to frame the question. We know there isn't enough. So how do you deal with the constituent that says, where's my vaccine?
I tell you, it's very frustrating, JD. Much like this is sort of a repeat of the testing, where we were challenged, mightily by that, right? Where were you going to go get a test? And it took time to really ramp that up. And we were working with community stakeholders and volunteers to get people to, call the hotline, find out where you can go. We opened up a transportation network that, to get people tested, even though that wasn't really used as much as we thought it was going to be. But now it's, it's the same thing, with doses being scarce, information changing daily, now it looks like, pharmacies are coming on board more, but they're running out of doses. I've had friends call me saying, hey, Rob, what do I tell my parents? And my thing is go to the website, go to the county. They've got a really good website, where you can go and get the information. I answered an email yesterday from a senior in the city who was frustrated because they went on the website, the state website. It was difficult to navigate, and she was concerned about her husband. The good thing is that they both have gotten their first round of their vaccines, and at least, for her, it was like, hey, thanks for answering my email. Even though I didn't have a really great answer, I got back to this person. And I think that it also shows you too the vulnerability of local government to because people are counting on you, but you're not distributing the vaccine. It's not your job. It's being handled at the county level and the state level. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned in this as well, because hopefully, we won't have to go through something like this again, but I do know that we will all be better prepared for these types of events. And it really could take on a lot of different meanings, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a pandemic. It could be some other major issue, public health issue that affects a community. But it's frustrating, as Joe said, we have families too. And that, we're human, and we're anxious just like everybody else is, but we got to make sure that we can, keep it together for others.
Steve?
Yeah, I think that we're in the same similar situation. We all wish there were more vaccines. And I think that our county and the state have, at least the capacity is here to give out the vaccine if we have it. And I think that that's really, from a local government perspective, our county executive, Pat Ryan, they've got a great site set up across the street from City Hall. They can do 50,000 vaccinations a month, but we're getting 1,500 a week for the whole county. And so at that rate, we have 120,000 people currently eligible. You do the math on that, right. And that's just, it also just shows that, we, the issues here are at the federal level, and are beyond our control. But like Rob said, all we're doing is trying to give people the information that we have. And at least with information, people have power. And that's at least now we can tell them what websites to go to, where to check in, where to keep checking. And that's at least something, but it is one of those, I feel slightly helpless for, in this situation, but we're just trying to continue to push.
And Joe?
Well, as stated, we all know the answer is product. We need the vaccine. Capacity, I think even Orange County, we have capacity. The system's complex. As complex as this is going to have issues. And the one I hear is fairness. And one I've been arguing a little bit has been some fairness issues also. We haven't had a pod site here in Middletown. We have an elderly population, a large Black and brown community. And so I do hear the fairness issue brought up a bit. I thought they could have worked better with local government in the area of getting seniors, communities with a senior program like us. We have a 3,000 member senior program. And when it first rolled out, we were advocating for getting, a vaccine site here, register, it's not only Middletown people, it's Middletown area people in the program. The same thing with the housing projects, but it is what it is. The internet as the primary source for signing up puts so many people at a disadvantage because they don't know how to use the site. Mm-hmm. And it is complicated. And I mentioned earlier, we used our senior program to help some people, but a lot of the information is private and you really don't want someone else answering those questions. The phone lines are an alternative, but they were tied up. So, but for the most part, I think the state and county has done a good job at creating capacity and opening up if they get vaccine. When those appointments open up online, you can see them when you click onto the state sites and you just see hundreds and hundreds of appointments, and all of a sudden a few minutes later they're gone. I think they were doing thousands a minute the other day. So having that kind of system in place is important, but it does no good without having product. Now we're up to what, 1.6 million, 1.7 million vaccines a day, which is about double over the last month. I think sometimes and it continues where government will underpromise and overperform. I think that's an old government trick, is you raise your budget high and you say it's going to take twice as much time, and then when the project is done, you came in under budget and well on time. So, and I think that's happening with the vaccine because the numbers don't add up.
No.
It's 240 million people are eligible for the vaccine, not 330 million. Mm-hmm. If 75% get it, you're down into the 200 millions. We have 600 million vaccines committed up till June, July. I think everyone's going to be able to have a vaccine because the capacity is there. And now it's just a matter of getting products. So it might be hopeful and wishful thinking, but I think the system is going to work and flow well from this point.
So I'm looking at the time. I'm gonna just take one last question, try to end this discussion on an upbeat here. And as you look back, is there a local hero? Other than the three of you, I mean, are there a local hero or heroes that have, you sort of look back and you remember, Steve, whether it was the delivery of food going on early on, which was a remarkable story up in Kingston, and how, came together on that. Is there a particular story that, sort of is etched in your memory about someone's stepping forward and doing something that kind of made you pause for a moment and say, that was pretty nice?
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, I'll just feed off of what you said. And in Kingston, our nonprofit organizations came together in the early days to be able to make sure that folks had food, everything from groceries being delivered to hot meals being cooked at our neighborhood centers. And it was truly a community effort. I personally delivered many meals for many weeks to folks because, again, at a time when everything was shut down, I felt like I needed to do something physically to help people. And so if I could spend my lunch break driving around delivering food to folks, like that's the least I could do. And I feel like that was, and it's still ongoing. The Kingston Emergency Food Collaborative is still literally delivering meals every day to residents here in Kingston. And I just think that's probably my uplifting story. It's just the fact that we all came together to help feed people when the schools were closed and grocery stores were difficult to get to, and people were nervous and scared to go out of their houses.
Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's just much like Steve. I mean, I think the community hero is the community. The spirit of helping one another, the spirit of Poughkeepsie, right? The Poughkeepsie that's why I'm here, and I love this city. There were many people, and they're still doing it, as Steve said. People that were involved in community outreach and delivering meals and preparing meals and getting donations, nonprofits, regular citizens, people that I hadn't even met before, who just wanted to help. There was no lack, and I'll end it with this, there was no lack of people who wanted to help. Sometimes it was, where do you plug them in, right? We'd have people call up and say, I want to do this, I want to have a food drive, I want to, just pop up drive-in food pantries that were being done all over the city and still being done. So, when you look back, and at some point we're really gonna look back on this, and there's a lot of heartache and a lot of loss, but there's a lot of spirit that we need to continue with. We proved to ourselves and to the community that we could respond to the challenges. And when COVID is done, there are much more challenges to be met. Let's use the network that we've created to face these, and to do it as a community, to do it together. And I think that's the most important, feeling that I take away from all of it. And it's still going on today.
Joe?
I think hands down, it's the quote essential employees, which it's pretty broad, but especially early on when the medical professionals, when they didn't have the appropriate PPE and they're the ambulance driver or the ambulance workers picking up people, and they didn't have the proper protective equipment, yet they were still doing it. The hospital workers and the grocery workers, and our local heroes are the police and fire on a normal basis. That's their job, as we call it. And the same thing with the medical people, that's their job. But it still deserves recognition that they went above and beyond their jobs. And we recognize that. One day we got along with the town of Waukegan, and we surrounded Orange Regional Medical Center at the time, or Garnett, and just blowing sirens and recognizing and thanking them for what they were doing. And I can't imagine myself doing it, to be honest with you. I mean, they're putting their selves in jeopardy, their families in jeopardy. And this includes grocery store workers. Remember the fear of going into a grocery store. And just all of those, quote, essential workers are just, they stepped up to the plate. And one other thing is labor unions, where traditionally, we'll have a daily battle with unions, especially municipal unions, when it comes to doing work that they're not supposed to do. It's not in their job title. And that's a traditional battle back and forth. Not one time did I hear from any union or any employee that, no, that's not my job title. I'm not going to deliver that food because I'm not a food delivery guy. I'm a police officer, or I'm a fireman. I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that, or even city hall workers. So I think everyone got together, and we found out that really people are good, and they rallied around each other, and we made it this far, and we're going to make it through this crisis. And I think 21 is going to be a great year as we move forward.
I appreciate all of your time this morning, and I appreciate it, especially the last question and the answers you gave. As we live in what is characterized an extremely polarized world, you've each described a message of hope that exists within each of your communities. So thank you for your time. I thank our sponsors. Please remember to register for our next session, which will be with the county executives of Dutchess, Ulster, and Orange, and it'll be on March 25th. Until then, this is Jonathan Drapkin and Joe Chaika and the staff at Pattern wishing you safe travels.